It's a cool and wet January morning, about the middle of January. It's about time for me to start collecting scion wood for grafting. Today we're going to look at fruit trees that I've been training just to see what their progress is, like how my interventions have worked so far, what the next steps are, just because it provides talking points in real life to see how these trees are doing. This is a cherub tree, and as you can see, it's quite vigorous, and this is only 2 years old. And it had a setback, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the reason it's so big and vigorous is because it was on an established rootstock. A root that had been here just barely growing for years and years. So it had a small top, but an established, root system. And so the scion was able to just grow like crazy off of this established root system. I had it all trained this spring to exactly how I wanted it. Some deer got in here. So everything was growing exactly how I wanted it. The system I use was in place. I had notched above, for anyone who doesn't know. So what I'm usually doing is taking off buds that I don't want to grow, putting a notch in the bark into the wood a little bit above the buds that I do want to grow, and then leaving a couple of extra buds around each bud that I do want to grow as insurance. So that's why this has a lot of branches, is because I left extra stuff on there on purpose. Anyway, I had everything I wanted just the way I wanted it, and it was growing. For instance, this right here is one of the branches I picked, or one of the buds. So I had notched that, and it grew out, and it was way out here, and then the deer just ate it back down to this point. Because it had so much energy from, this established root system, it grew back really well anyway. So I think on this tree I had only chosen 3 scaffold branches, and I'm going to pick out which ones those were, and I'm going to take off the rest of this growth, because at this point what I want in this particular tree is I want 3 or 4 big branches that come out along the trunk, and each of those is going to be spaced out. This is the lowest one I'm keeping, and it's growing off down the hill, right? So I put that one downhill. Also, that's south. So having the lowest branch facing south is a good idea as well, because it shades the trunk from sunburn. And then the next one was probably this one right here. And then the next one would have been this. And that provides 3 branches pointing in different directions. But I think we'll go ahead and select this one as well. It's pointing in another 4th direction, roughly. And it's a nice shoot, and I just don't see any reason not to keep it. I like that branch here. I'm happy with those choices, and everything else is going to come off, because what I want is I want to drive growth into those 4 branches and the top only. I don't want a bunch of extra wood on here competing and drawing resources away from these branches. I want these branches to be almost like extra trunks of the tree, where they're really taking up a lot of resources and growing big and strong. I like this branch here better than this branch. It has better spacing. That's good. So you do want space between the branches. If I were growing this as a much bigger tree, it's going to be a pretty big tree as it is, but if it was much bigger, then I'd want to space these out even further. As it is, though, the closest one here is 4 inches, which is closer than I usually like to do it, but that's just where the branch ended up, and it's okay. This one's too low. This is like the spiny juvenile growth. It's really like almost like a pointy spur. That's not really good material to graft. There's some more of it right here. This originally was a stump it looks like it was about a couple inches in diameter. And I grafted 2 scions in there, bark grafts. And I'm going to take this off too and toss that, because again, it's like juvenile growth. I allowed both of these to grow because it heals the cut faster, and it also was producing scion wood. I think I'll leave this for 1 more year before I cut it off, but I'm going to cut it pretty short here. So here you can see where the deer bit that off, but then it resprouted and grew really well. They ate the tip here, so that caused it to grow 2 tops. I like the angle of this coming out is good, the angle of this, and I used my bud clips on this. It's like a clothespin with a piece of sheet metal on it, and the way I designed them this time, I was able to just clip them on right above the bud and just leave them and walk away before the bud was even growing, and it worked. So that's cool. I like how this is coming out, but this one's longer, and this one also has some damage right here from cicadas. They lay their eggs in the bark there, so that means that there's bugs in there. So I'm going to cut that off, cut this completely off, and then pick one of these tops, which I like this one. It's a little bit bigger. There's some cicada damage, cicada damage, cicada damage. Nope, too much cicada damage. So we're gonna pick the smaller one instead. Now we have 4 scaffolds. They're pointing in different directions. I would like to train these out a little bit. Not too much, just a little bit like that. This one too, maybe that one. After the last branch, I usually want about 18 to 24 inches. Then I'll just clip the top off. So let's say at about 20, that's like, yeah. That's pretty good. And this will just grow some points there. There's no hurry like establishing this in a certain way. It's okay if it takes longer. Now, most people will tell you that you need to cut these back as well. They're going to be too skinny, too wispy, and you need to force them to branch. In my experience, not the case. And in the 1920 Apple framework study that I reference a lot, which I'll put a link to in the description, they also said they had been told that, you know, everybody says that, and then they tested it and found that it was better to let them grow. It delays the time, you know, for getting my full framework, obviously, because I have to regrow. And it will make them branch, but often it only makes them branch right in the area where you cut it. So the alternative to that is to notch. Let's say that I want a lateral here, which just means like a little side branch that's going to grow. This is a little bit early for this training, but I think it'll work. And it's a good experiment. So if I cut a little notch right above that bud, don't overthink this. Everyone's like, how do I cut the notch? Just cut a little notch through the bark and barely into the wood, or you can scrape the wood a little bit to make sure the cambium's disturbed. That's it. And then say I want another notch like about a foot up here, and I'm picking buds that are off to the side of the branch, right? This is growing off the side of the branch, like this one here. And in this case, you know, it might be better to just go ahead and tip that off. It's not like I'm against heading back cuts, which is what that is called. It's not the only game. I want a lateral up here somewhere off to this side. This one looks good. Some people use a file for this, just a little round like rat tail file. And then coming up here, we might as well just do another one here. My cat is like begging for attention here. Okay, same here. I'm imagining the space of the tree like growing out here. This branch is way down here, and we're going to have a side branch out this way. And then up here on this side, there's a big space here in the tree, so we're going to cut notch right there. Yeah, you don't want to cut too deep because you'll weaken the branch. And then if we come up here, we'll just cut another notch right there. And then this one. So same thing here. The biggest space I see is over this way. So I'm going to come out here and look at a lateral about here. Now you don't have to do this, and often they'll grow some laterals, but it's pretty cool. The difference is like for a home grower or a small orchardist, these interventions are not a big deal. You know, this has taken me a long time because I'm talking about it, and I'm just, you know, it's my first one of the year and everything. But especially if you were to use a file to cut these notches, it really doesn't take that long, and you could whip them out real fast. This is set up for the year, right? I've got my 4 scaffolds established. Again, they would be even bigger and more vigorous if the deer hadn't got to them when they were pretty long. They were like 8 inches long, and they really narfed them back. And, you know, they didn't even really start to regrow significantly for a couple of weeks. Anyway, I have my scaffolds. The thing's topped off at the level I want it to top off at. And what this is going to look like eventually is 4 nice, strong scaffolds with nice wide angles at the branches where they meet the trunk. The top is going to be smaller because these big branches are sucking off the resources. This is called a modified central leader. It's very similar to delayed open center. If I wanted delayed open center, I would just cut this right there. That's the only difference. And delayed meaning that, you know, the branches come up one at a time and then you cut the middle out. So instead of just cutting it off and growing all the branches at one point. So watch my other videos on fruit tree training and stuff. I'll link some of them here. Anyway, so the top's going to grow smaller, and I'm going to grow like, you know, 3 or 4 things off the top that are smaller, like a little candelabra. You know, these are all sucking resources out, and then the resources have to be shared between you know, 3 or 4 tops. So it's going to keep the tree down nice and low and make an umbrella shaped tree. Things are easy to pick. It gets plenty of sunlight. It has a nice long-lived, potentially long-lived structure, and it's all good. So thumbs up on this tree. Everything pretty much went exactly the way I wanted, even with the deer. Now this tree, I think, was a first year. Yeah, maybe it was just a small tree that was only, you know, yay high or something. Anyway, the deer ate that off too, which caused it to grow 2 tops. Once that happened, I just let it go. The only thing I did, I think, was I just put this clip on a branch that happened to grow out naturally, because I figured, why not? You know, I mean, it looks like it's a good placement for a branch. I'm happy with this as the top, so we're going to take this off, and this is too low, so we're going to take this off. So now I want to set the rest of this up, and I'm going for the same tree form as the last one, and so that means I get to go along here and I get to pick the exact buds that I want to grow, right? So we already have one this way. I want the lowest branch to grow toward the south, which I'm going to pick this one right here and go for a third. So again, this is on a standard rootstock, so this tree could get huge. And I've spaced my branches out about 8 to 10 inches apart. Yeah, that's around maybe 9 inches there, probably 9 inches there. Okay, so in this case, we have one branch going this way. This one's gonna go that way. I could do a 4th one going kind of that way, but I can make these grow to fill the space and just have 3. So I think I'm gonna stick with just the 3 there, and we don't need that anymore. The other thing I'm going to do with this one is actually just cut this to an underside, a downward facing bud, so it grows out and up like that, just to set it back a little and let these other buds catch up. You know, this one will still probably be a little bit ahead of the game, but that's all right. Let's remove extra buds. So I'll leave like 2 buds around this bud that I notched as the primary scaffold. Everything around this bud comes off because I don't need any extra growth. I got my scaffold, I know where it's going to be, it's already established. And then up here where there's this other one here, I'm going to leave another bud facing the same direction, even though it's a couple inches down here. And then I'm going to leave one facing that way. And then the rest of these come off. And then up here, further up, same thing. I don't need any of these growing. There's dormant buds where I picked these buds out. There's like dormant buds hiding at the base of these. And so those may grow back, but I can summer prune them off or just let them grow and, you know, remove them later. What we have is a notched bud for each of the primary scaffolds, which are most likely to grow really well. This one that's already established. And then I've removed all the extra buds except for a couple around each notched bud for insurance, in case, let's say, the deer get back in here and they totally wreck, you know, the bud that I wanted to grow. It gives me more options for retraining the tree. And that's it. It's about understanding a little bit about the physiology of the tree and working with it. Now this is the apple formerly known as Ice Princess. Formerly known, not formally known, which I don't have a good name for yet, so it's not actually going to get released. But what I'm going to use this for, hopefully this year, I mean, it's a lot of work, is indexing my trees for virus. It's that it shows a lot of symptoms. So if I graft this onto an infected tree, then it will show symptoms and I'll know that the tree's infected, whereas a lot of trees don't show it. Maybe only 15-20% of the trees show it strongly or enough to even tell. I could have a tree that's grafted that just isn't showing signs, but it's actually infected. So we're just going to call it Ice Princess until it gets a better name. I'll probably use a lot of the scion wood I collect this year of this to do that indexing. Hopefully, if I can pull it off. It's a lot of work. Before I move, I'll know which trees are infected, right? So I can replace them or you know, just not take them with me or whatever. This is part of my daffodil breeding project. These are all seedlings. There's probably maybe 300 seedlings in here. Yeah, this is a treasure trove of genetics. These could all turn out very different. Probably some great stuff in here. All right, let's go look at another tree. One more thing about this tree is look how much cherub scion wood I have, and I have tons more growing in town and in other places. So I really caught up on cherub scion wood, and I'm probably going to graft some of these branches over to my new crab, Tomboy. Because this tree is very established, if I graft on, say, 2 or 3 scions of that on here, it's going to grow really fast, and I'll get, you know, a lot more scion wood. By this time next year, I'll have a significant amount of scion wood, even with like just grafting 3 of these. I just want to show you real quick the difference between that system I just showed you of training, modified central leader, and something that's more of like just a central leader, which is going to have a lot more branches. I kind of started to train it toward a modified central leader, and then I just decided to let a bunch more of the wood grow. So what happens is you don't really get these big dominant branches. Like there's one down here, but that's one of the ones I established early. But that's kind of more like what I would expect branches to look in a modified central leader. But because I left all these different branches to grow in here, they're all taking energy off and not allowing those branches to grow large. You know, take a look at how that looks, and then we'll take a look at something that I trained to more of a true modified central leader. This tree is probably a little older than that pink parfait tree down there, so it's not a direct comparison in terms of age, but it's not much older. Modified central leader system, this is a great example. So I have 4 branches going in 4 different directions, and then a couple branches at the top, which also branch out a little bit. And you can see, instead of having a bunch of little wispy branches, it just has these big branches, and it's covered in all this spur wood that produces tons of fruit. Another beautiful example, this is a sweet 16 tree. So it has 4 main scaffolds, no other extra growth, and then like a diversified top up here with, you know, numerous things growing off of it. This is a bite me tree grafted to a piece of root. It's called root grafting. And so you just take a piece of root with a few, you know, small roots off of it, and you graft your scion wood directly into that and bury it. So the idea with this one is that I buried it really deep. It's probably 10, 12 inches deep to where the root graft is. And I was hoping that the actual tree, you know, the scion, would sprout some roots and grow. And, you know, I haven't dug in there to see yet, but maybe we should do that. I've been real curious about whether this has grown its own roots or not. And it has. There's a root right there. Let's excavate a little more carefully. Or it's a root that's coming from deeper. So remember that the root stock of this was just maybe a 3 or 4 inch piece of apple root. That sounds like a root too. Yeah, there's 2 nice big roots right here, and I'm pretty sure those are above the graft union. So it does look like it's growing its own roots. That's a pretty neat way to go if you want a tree that's on its own roots, or you want just a full standard size tree. You can just dig up some apple roots and graft a scion right into the root, and after it grows for a year, either use something that's going to break apart, like parafilm will break apart because it's really thin. On its own, you don't have to unwrap it, but if you wrap it with something that's going to constrict it, you have to dig it up, like I did with this one, and unwrap it after it heals. I don't want anything except my 4 main scaffolds that I grew here, right? This is what I got here. This comes off. I'm in no need of a lot of bite me wood, so I probably won't even save these. Maybe I'll save this one. Yeah. This was, you know, this tree is several years old, so I wasn't able to train it until, you know, it got tall enough, but it really grew like a whip. So there weren't a lot of side branches. There were some, but not a lot. And so I was able last year, to select all of my branches in 1 year, which I do like to do, because if I had selected, say, this one the year before, even if I cut it back, it would be well ahead of the other ones. And this way, if you can select them all in 1 year, it really makes a very balanced growth. Okay, so you can see I had some props here just to make that angle a little bit wider. I would kind of prefer this grows out a little bit wider like that. I don't really need like a whole nother bite me tree. So what I'll probably do is leave the top to grow as bite me, and then each of these branches I'll graft to other seedlings of mine that I need to propagate. So the main one that comes to mind is my new red fleshed apple, which has a name, but you don't get to know it yet. Maybe tomboy. There's some other ones that I really want to propagate, but because this is growing really vigorously and well, I think I'll probably use it mostly for that red fleshed apple, because I know that's a winner. I'm going to want a lot of scion wood of that one. So because of that, I don't really need to train this at all, because I'm going to graft literally every branch to something else. But let's just take this. We'll go up about 18 to 24 inches. I tend to go a little bit higher than the usual recommendation of 18 inches. So that's closer to 2 feet there. And so just the top will be bite me. I'm going to leave all of this stuff here for now, and I'm going to leave everything else for now. But when I graft these, I'm going to take the extra buds off. If there's any buds around the base, I'll take those off because I don't want them to grow back. But I'll just leave all these for now, and I can come back in the springtime or early summer and just pinch some of these out if they're growing too excessively. And that's it for that. But as you can see, I got everything I wanted. I have wide branch angles coming off the trunk. I have 4 excellent things going in 4 perfect directions. This is exactly what I'm going for. And you can see how precise and even this method is. Like, everything's even. It's all happening in one, single year. So if I were not grafting these branches over, I would probably go out here and notch a couple of these to make some side scaffolds, just to be sure that it grew scaffold branches. One thing I don't do though, when I do those scaffold branches, is I don't disbud, because a lot of these could still differentiate into fruiting buds, and if they overgrow, you just clip them off, next winter or in the summer. There's really nothing left out here that's any good. January russets I just pulled off and ate, and they were actually a little bit over the hill this year at this time. And the rest of this stuff is just kind of mushy, or it's more like cider material. Now the Lady Williams are good now. Last one I had was good. Wow. Weird texture. It has kind of a weird foamy texture, but lots of flavor. And, this is where Pink Lady gets its flavor from. This is in the lineage of Pink Lady. I'm not sure exactly where in the lineage, but you can recognize the flavor. But Lady Williams actually has even more flavor. Like, I just picked some Pink Ladies that were really good. Much better than what you get in the store, because they're off the tree in, the winter time. So they're nice and ripe. Lady Williams is even more flavorful, but the texture isn't as good. It's not as big. It's not as uniform. It gets scab really bad. I don't know how Pink Lady is with that, but Lady Williams is pretty bad with the scab. But Lady Williams brings a lot to the table. It's always tart and refreshing. Even when it's super ripe, that never loses that. And it has a lot of kind of a complex fruity flavor going to it. And of course, the season is super late. And we're going to tie this video up with a little taste test here of January russet, which actually, you know what? That looks a little underripe. Feels hard as a rock. I think I'm going to have to leave that a little bit longer. Sorry. Didn't mean to get you excited there. That apple's been pretty impressive this year. It is much more refined than it's been in previous years, a little more accessible. It's still a very rustic apple, quite tart, but it can have a very rich, nice flavor, and a very welcome in, the late winter here, or the middle of winter, whatever this is.